we really do need to account for the overall cost, not just the pharmacy costs. A few words about cancer. I think we're going to have a little a drama about cancer in an hour or two. If we look at data on the relative survival rate of cancer from the mid-1970s, when the war on cancer was declared, to about the late 1990s. In 1975, the 5-year survival rate from cancer was about 50%. There was only a 50% chance of being alive 5 years after diagnosis. By 2000, that had increased to about 66%. Now, there are issues with the measurement of cancer survival, like lead time bias. People might be diagnosed earlier than they used to, and that would appear to lead to an increase in survival. So we have to be careful in looking at cancer survival rates. But I've done that, and I think others have done that in studies. And in one study, I showed that basically that chemotherapy innovation, that is the use of new chemotherapy agents, led to a significant increase in the 1-year survival rate and in longer duration survivals during the 1990s and subsequently. So I think pharmaceutical innovation and also diagnostic imaging innovation have played important roles in the increase in cancer survival, both in the US and in other countries. Some of my colleagues at the University of Chicago wrote a very influential article called The Value of Health and Longevity, and they argue that a 1% reduction in US cancer mortality would be worth nearly $500 billion, given how much what the apparent valuation of a statistical life year is, that even a modest reduction in cancer mortality has tremendous social value. Let's talk about cardiovascular disease. That's the #1 cause of death in the US and perhaps in Croatia as well. In another study, I did some international comparisons. I was able to get data from IMS Health, which has kind of the world monopoly on pharmaceutical data, on what drugs are used to treat cardiovascular disease in different countries, in 20 OECD countries over a 10-year period. And here are data on the top 10 cardiovascular drugs used in Switzerland and in Austria. They're right across the border from one another. You might think they're culturally similar. You might expect them to use the same drugs. And in fact, the #1 drug is the same. Hydrochlorothiazide is the #1 cardiovascular drug in both countries. But then things get a little less similar, like atorvastatin or Lipitor is the #3 drug in Switzerland, but it's not even on the top 10 in Austria. And that's because basically Austria decided not to reimburse atorvastatin. They sort of went with simvastatin instead. So there are differences in pharmaceutical use across countries. And one way of characterizing those differences is to look at sort of relative access to new drugs across countries. What this shows is in 2004, what % of cardiovascular drugs were, quote, new drugs in these 20 different countries. And in this case, I define a new drug as a drug that was launched worldwide after 1995. So basically a drug that was less than 10 years old. Now, somewhat surprisingly, Australia had the newest cardiovascular drugs. 20% of the cardiovascular pills in Australia were less than 10-year-old pills. Canada was #2, the United States was #5. But down at the bottom, we have the emerging Eastern European economies where fewer than 1% of the drugs were new drugs. So there's really very limited access to new drugs in those countries. What I examined in this study was the link between cardiovascular drug use and the access to new drugs and hospitalization due to cardiovascular disease. And I found that in countries that adopted new cardiovascular drugs more rapidly, we had larger declines in the number of cardiovascular hospital stays. So basically, if people have access to the newer agents, they are less likely to be hospitalized. And in this case, the reduction in hospital expenditure more than offset the increase in drug expenditure. So unlike the case of HIV, where it was only about a 50% cost offset, here I found that there was kind of a multiple, that the decrease in expenditure on cardiovascular hospital stays was 3.5 times as large as the increase in cardiovascular drug expenditure. So I think that, again, points to the need not to look at the drug budget in isolation and to look at it in the context of overall healthcare spending. I've done other work along these lines in the United States, looking at state variation. So not only is there variation in drug use across countries, but even within countries, like within the United States and Germany and so forth. So I think you kind of have the flavor of that. And that has a bearing on sort of the relative desirability of branded and generic drugs. We all know that generic drugs are less expensive than branded drugs, and they can be a significant cost-saving factor. The problem with generic drugs is they're old. That is, in the US, average effective patent life is 12 years, so a drug does not go off patent for at least 12 years. And the average age of generic drugs is much older than the average age of branded drugs. And so basically, if basically we tilt too much in favor of generics, that has the effect of denying access to newer drugs and to the technological progress embodied therein. And I have done other work that looks at hospital use and nursing home use as well. And so again, I think you get the idea. I also have looked at sort of health status. I mean, use of hospitals and mortality are pretty good indicators of health status. If people are dying or they're being hospitalized, it's a pretty good bet that they're not in the best health. But we also have self-assessed health status, patient-reported health status. And in another study with a colleague, we found that people who use newer drugs had better post-treatment health than people using older drugs for the same condition. They were more likely to survive, their perceived health status was higher, and they experienced fewer activity, social, and physical limitations. And so it really, there is the quality of life aspect to this as well. And one final effect I'll point out is about ability to work. Now, the way that we can try to sort this out is this chart shows the cumulative number of drugs approved for 3 different conditions, 3 major conditions: diabetes, migraine, and asthma, relative to how many drugs there were for each condition in 1975. And what it shows is that the evolution of drugs is very different for different conditions, that there's been the most increase for diabetes, but the timing varies as well. So in another study, what I looked at was the effect of the number of drugs on the market to treat a condition on the average health status of people with that condition. And I found that basically if the number of drugs to treat a condition increased, the average health status of people with a condition tended to improve. And so that's another piece of evidence to add to the total. I think that's probably gives you a reasonable overview. And so to conclude, I've done quite a few studies of both the US, other countries, and internationally of the contribution of new medicines to longevity increase based on both aggregate and patient-level data. I've also studied the impact of new medicines on the utilization of other healthcare, on productivity, and so on. And in conclusion, I have to agree with Dr. Einstein that if we keep doing things the same way, we should expect to get the same outcomes. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Frank. My name is Boris Azaïs. I work for MSD as a Director of Industrial Policy. And after a full day of conference, I guess you get the sense of what we're trying to do here, which is to challenge our knowledge and challenge our understanding about the healthcare systems. And you may wonder why today I'm presenting from working for a pharmaceutical company, and I'm presenting on innovative delivery systems, innovative ways to deliver healthcare. It's primarily because I participated in the drafting and elaboration of a report that looked at new models of delivering healthcare. And the reason why we are involved in this type of report, and as much as we involved through various work that has been referred to by our colleague from McKinsey through the World Economic Forum, it's because we care about healthcare, and we actually care about the sustainability of our healthcare systems, and we are concerned that the sustainability of our healthcare systems is heavily linked with its ability to embrace change and embrace innovation. And this is the reason why a company like MSD is involved in healthcare policy discussions, but this is true of other companies. I want to make that clear, is that there's a lot of companies, research-based pharmaceutical companies, that participate actively in healthcare policy for that reason, because we are a key part of the healthcare system, and we would not exist without a strong and sustainable healthcare system. So, the good thing about coming last during the day is that we've seen already a lot of the evidence about the challenges that are faced to healthcare systems. And just a way to summarize, we have to keep in mind what it is for healthcare policymakers, what is their mission in life and how they try to achieve their public health objectives. And they're faced with this healthcare iron triangle. Basically, they have to deliver improved access to quality healthcare without breaking the budget. And if you think about the mission and the vision of the Croatian healthcare system that we've seen earlier at the previous session, but even this morning also it was mentioned, it basically contains these elements of providing better care, but also taking care of efficiency. So I don't need to go through the same challenges. You get it. There's a number of challenges that we face for healthcare systems, and we will have one way or the other to find solutions, because there is no way back in healthcare in history. So that would be quite dramatic for our generation to be the first one to go back in healthcare standards in human history. One thing I wanted to point out in these challenges, it's really the demographic shock, but not just because we are going to see an increased number of older people. And again, here, you heard it from Rainer Münz this morning. This is a great thing, of course, because when you're faced with older age, you have also to think about the alternative. But the problem is really for healthcare professionals. How are we going to maintain our healthcare systems with a decreasing amount of healthcare professionals? Within the next 10 years, across the OECD, you have 1/3 of healthcare professionals who are going to retire. That's as strong as demographics. It's basically a fact today. It's going to happen. So we need to eventually find new ways, better ways, innovative ways to deliver healthcare. And the purpose of my talk here is really to share state-of-the-art thinking or practices, innovative examples of how to deliver better healthcare at a lower cost in various settings. So one thing that policymakers in healthcare face, especially now that they have to go back more and more to finance ministers is that our healthcare systems, the way they're designed, are highly inefficient. This is just results from a survey done by IBM